The color pie can be thought of to have two forms, the thematic and the mechanical. The side we often talk about on this channel is the thematic or philosophical color pie. This version of the pie is all about the why a color does what it does, and how it's represented by characters and factions. It's the fluff and flavor, but equally important and just as complex is the other side of the pie, the mechanical color pie, which dictates how each color plays. Think of it as the nuts and bolts of the game, the how and function of each color. It's the rules and mechanics that define what a color can and can't do. This aspect of the color pie makes the game of Magic what it is at a fundamental level. You see, the mechanical color pie is what makes the game itself function. It defines how a color plays, what its strengths and weaknesses are, and how it interacts with the other colors. This is what creates expectations when you sit down across from your opponent and they start laying down lands. You instinctively know what you're up against because the definition of what each color is capable of has been defined and reinforced over the years by the mechanical color pie. You know that a blue deck will manipulate the flow of the game, countering spells, milling cards, or even taking extra turns. A red deck will hit the ground running on turn 1, leveraging haste and burn spells to end the game as quick as it can. And a black deck will take drastic measures to win, perhaps draining your life or raising the dead from a graveyard. This mechanical structure is what keeps the gameplay balanced and ensures that every color has a distinct identity in play. Without it, Magic would feel directionless, where colors would lose their meaning and start blending together, making the very idea that we divide cards into colors meaningless. In this effort, Mark Rosewater wrote a blog outlining the definition of the mechanical color pie, at least how it stood in 2021. It's a handy article that I find myself referencing from time to time. In it, he talks about how they define a mechanic in relation to each color. There are 3 categories in this system: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Each mechanic will fall into one of these buckets for each color. And if it does not, then that color does not have access to that mechanic, at least without breaking the color. But let's put a pin in that idea for now. A color being primary dictates that the mechanic is crucial to the identity of the color and is commonly seen in every set. Secondary means it's one that a color has access to at times, but is most likely core to another color, usually coming with it some sort of restriction, downside, or limitation. And tertiary is what I would almost consider a defined color pie bend, and as such, it's very rare in the color or is greatly limited in its scope. But I think it's best to frame this with some examples so you know what this exactly means. For instance, white and green are primary in life gain, while black is secondary. Because of this, white and green have cards with raw life gain mechanics and are often simply just better at it, while black's life gain is something that usually comes at a cost or requires a condition to be met. Another example is card draw, where blue is primary, while red and white are tertiary in it, meaning that for them, card draw is rare and comes with very specific rules or restrictions, such as red's card draw being temporary, known as an impulsive draw.
The answer is not to fundamentally go against what red is. When we try to solve these problems, it's like, is there a way for red to do something that is red? So that's how we came up with impulsive draw. The idea is red's not supposed to be really good at card drawing, but we allow it to exile cards and then cast those cards under turn. So it's kind of like card drawing, but it's immediate card drawing. I have to immediately use it. I can't save it. I can't, it is not card drawing how other colors use it, but it was a neat way to do a red card drawing.
From here, I want to do a bit of an experiment where I will ask you a question that I'm sure you will get right. What color first comes to mind when I say land destruction? Did you guess red? If you guessed that right, that's because of a well-defined mechanical color pie. It's something you know intuitively because of consistency of use of that mechanic primarily in one color. You see, we have these expectations and understandings inherently because of the general consistency of the designers to paint within the lines, if you will. That's why something like Mark Rosewater's article on the color pie is so important, because it showcases the rules that the designers work within and how they internally handle each color's mechanics. But just because a mechanic is defined as being able to do or not do something doesn't mean this will always be the case. Over time, we've seen how the color pie has evolved. This has had the unintended consequence of the pie bleeding into itself, making it a little less defined over time. I think the best example would be card draw. At its heart, it's a blue mechanic, and it was for most of the game's life. But over time, it has bled into every color, and as of the 2021 definition of the mechanical color pie, it's a mechanic for each color, even if it's not primary in any other color but blue. But what's interesting and shows how the color pie still cuts through is in how a universal mechanic like this is implemented. The designers no longer simply say blue and black of card draw, that's it. Instead, they ask, what does white or red card draw look like? And how can we make it thematically consistent, proving that behind the mechanical color pie is the thematic one. But outside of the evolution of the color pie, sometimes colors act in a way that is not expected and is noticeable because of how we've come to understand the color pie over the years through that consistency. This act of moving away from defined expectations is called a color pie break or bend. A bend being when a color gains access to an effect that it normally does not, but is managed in some way.
What a bend is something where, well, the color doesn't normally do this, but in a certain context, with a certain theme, there are things in which we bend a little bit, but just because you bend it once does not forever mean the color pie is changing. It just means that we allow a little bit of give.
Breaks, on the other hand, totally disregard any rules or expectations at all. We saw this a lot in the early days of Magic before the color pie had been refined to what we know it as now, leading to hilarious monstrosities like Stormseeker, which is clearly a red card, or Avoid Fate, which most definitely should be a blue card. Breaks are usually never welcome and only act to confuse what is otherwise a tightly designed color pie. These breaks can stand out as a sore spot because they are the antithesis to what the color pie represents, both in gameplay and in flavor. Note what I said there, and I've mentioned it a couple times. The expectation of flavor. I mean, you had to know I'd bring up the flavor side of the color pie. This is a DiceTry video after all. But truth be told, we can't really talk about the mechanical color pie without also discussing its relationship with the philosophical one. Because at the end of the day, they are truly two sides to the same coin and are meant to complement one another. What this means is that the mechanics serve the themes, and the themes reinforce the mechanics. This synergy is what makes each color feel natural, like a fully realized identity rather than just a pile of effects arbitrarily assigned to each color. When the mechanics and the themes are in sync, a color becomes intuitive. Of course, black trades life for power, it sees sacrifice as the price of ambition. Of course, red plays fast and loose because it thrives on impulse and chaos. This cohesion means that when a color implements a mechanic, it still has to feel right thematically, otherwise we know something's off. That's why the combined effort of the two sides of the color pie are so important. Because when the mechanical and the thematic color pie drift apart, things feel off. A color might mechanically do something, but if it doesn't feel like something that a color would do, it breaks our immersion. The strongest and best designs make mechanics and themes inseparable, where the way a color plays isn't just an expression of its strengths, but of its very soul. And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The mechanical and thematic color pie aren't just rules or restrictions, they make the game feel intuitive, each color feeling alive, and each deck feeling like an extension of something greater than just a pile of cards. When you cast a spell, you're not just playing within a predefined arbitrary mechanic, you're embodying an identity, a philosophy, a way of thinking that's been carefully shaped over decades. That's why consistency matters, and it's why the mechanical color pie is so important. It doesn't just make the game function, it makes it feel right. It ensures that when you sit down and shuffle up, you know what to expect. And as long as the mechanical and thematic color pie remain in sync, magic will continue to feel like magic. Thanks for watching. I hope this helped you gain an even greater love for the color pie. And if you're curious to know the history of how the color pie was made, then check out this video here. And with that, friends, I will catch you in the multiverse. Bye.